This exercise is going to be developing a composition from a series of connected points, lines, and shapes. And it's going to be using Adobe Illustrator to create this composition. So the artist that you see here on the right is Bridget Riley, and she is a founding member of the op art movement, which was a movement that originated in the UK around the 1960s. And what these artists were interested in was the way that we perceive three dimensions and how we perceive depth. And they were interested in creating paintings that contained a series and different compositions of really exact geometries and shapes to trick the eye or to create the illusion that these two-dimensional paintings were actually three-dimensional forms. So the final pieces that they were working with were primarily very flat, physically flat paintings, and they developed these different geometries and patterns to essentially trick the viewer into thinking that they were being immersed in a 3D world, or that they were perceiving a three-dimensional form, even though it was always on this very flat canvas. So we're going to be using Illustrator to create our own little op art pieces, and we're going to be using Bridget Riley's work as an inspiration for a lot of these exercises. So I wanted to show everyone an example of what the op artist had to start from, and then also talk a little bit about why Illustrator is a really excellent tool for developing pieces like this, and for developing graphics that do require very precise and exact measurements and shapes and different transformations, and the ability to change those, but then still maintain those exact dimensions and those different kinds of proportions. So I'm going to go over that more in the intro to Adobe Illustrator, and I'll be repeating this a lot during these exercises, but I did want to talk about why this is a really excellent application to use for this specific type of process. So what you see here on the right is the exploration and then the final painting that Bridget Riley did for a piece entitled Hesitate. So this was done in 1964. So obviously this was before people were able to easily access digital tools. And what you see here on the left is the piece that Bridget Riley used. It's almost a sketch, and also it's a grid that she was using to plan out how she was going to produce this final piece on the right. And you can see that what she did is she had a very precisely measured grid, and then as the grid went a little bit lower, she was reducing the vertical height of the grid, and then she then stretched out again as it went lower. So the idea was that this grid was meant to look as though it had a bend in it. And so then, and again, she was having to do this with exact measurements. And so then, once she had that grid, she was able to have a dimension for the circle that she was going to fit within that grid. So this was how she had to plan out the larger painting that was the final piece here on the right. And again, she had to use very exact measurements. She was using a lot of different geometries. She was using calculations. And this is a perfect application for Adobe Illustrator, because Adobe Illustrator allows you to create shapes and to have things very exactly measured. And then on top of that, it allows you to maintain the resolution of those shapes and apply different colors and different effects to them without losing the exact dimensions of those shapes. So again, we're going to go into that now as we start to work on our first exercise. So let's go over here. So I've opened up Illustrator, and immediately there's a lot of things that are similar to Photoshop and some things that are different. I'll be going into that more in the introduction to Illustrator. And then also, as I'm going through these exercises, I will try to point out, some of the things that are similar to Photoshop. I might go a little bit faster through because they are, hopefully as you're using these tools and getting used to them, there is some carryover, even if you're using a completely different application, there are some tools and some different concepts that just go across all these different programs. So anyway, a big difference, however, between Illustrator and Photoshop is that with Illustrator, you have this work area here. So this area here, the white area, this is your artboard. So any graphics or images that you place on that artboard, when you go to print or when you go to export this as a JPEG to post up on a website, all that, everything that's on this white area on this artboard, that's what's printed and that's what's exported. However, you're also able to use this work area here, this gray space, to keep things like reference materials, or let's say you have a color palette and you want to be using the eyedropper tool and there's a JPEG that you have that has these specific colors, but you know, it's something that it's not going to ever be in this final image, so it doesn't have to be on the artboard, but you can keep it off to the side here. So this is really great, again, for being able to have reference materials and not have to go back and forth from one piece, from one document to another document. So I've opened up a JPEG already in this other tab, and this is the JPEG of Bridget Riley's Hesitate, and I'm going to use this as a reference material. So I'm just going to copy it, and then I'm going to paste it, and then I'm going to just drag this over to the left. So now I have this, and I think I'm going to transform this and shrink it down and just keep it off to the side here. So this way it's off my printable area, it's off the part of the document that's going to be exported, but I can still reference this in terms of what it looks like visually, and what the layout looks like, what the composition looks like, and then also the colors there. So over here, and let me minimize this, there's a couple of different tabs over here on the right, and some of them are very similar to what you get in Photoshop. And I'm going to look at this layers tab right now because I'm going to be adding a couple of layers, and so this is something that's very similar to what you have in Photoshop, but then there are some differences. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new layer, and I'm going to lock this layer that has this reference material on it, just so I don't accidentally select it. So I'm going to then collapse this for a minute, and then I'm going to go over here. We're going to talk about a couple of the very basic tools that we're going to be using for this first exercise. So first of all, one of the biggest differences between Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator is the way that you select different objects versus selecting different pixels. So in Illustrator, you're not working with pixels primarily, you're working with vectors. And so every single line that you make, every single shape that you make, for the most part, Illustrator sees these all as different objects. So in order to select these objects, as opposed to the way that you do it in Photoshop, where you have to select the pixels and you're having to use the marquee tool a lot, or the magic wand, or the quick selection tool, in Illustrator, it's as simple as clicking on the object with the select tool. So this black arrow here, it's the very top tool, and the shortcut key for that is V. And that is something, if you're not going to remember any other shortcut, remember that, because when you're working in Illustrator, remembering that V is a very important thing, to be able to constantly be working with these different tools, and then you want to be able to shift to V in order to select the different things that you're making with these different tools. So I'll show you an example of this. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to want to make a series of circles because I am wanting this to look a little bit similar to Hesitate over here on the left. So I'm going to go over to my shape building tool, and down here there's an ellipse tool. The hotkey for that is L. I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to drag it out. Oops, and let me apply a color to that really fast so we can actually see it. Okay. So this works very similarly to how some of the shape tools and the shape selection tools worked in Photoshop. If I want this to be a perfect circle, then I can hold down Shift and I get that perfect circle proportion. If I want it to be more of an oval or an ellipse, I can just freehand make it. But I want this to be a circle because, again, I'm trying to have this be a little bit of the op art inspiration. So, and I just did it there. It's just ingrained in my head, so I'll do that again. So I'm making my circle, and then I'm letting go, and then you see what happens is when you finish the shape, it automatically selects the shape. But if I wanted to select this circle now, I would have to either go up to the toolbar and hit that selection tool, or I would just have to hit the hotkey V, which again, I'm trying to explain why that's the most important keyboard shortcut to remember. And now, again, the biggest difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. In Photoshop, when you're creating ellipses, you're usually doing it with the selection tool and then you're filling it. And then you have different shapes on one layer. And in order to move those, you either have to select them and then you can move them around in that one layer, or using a transform tool, or you can just move that entire layer. What happens with Illustrator, however, is you don't have to really do the same type of selection process because it's just looking at each different shape and each different brush stroke and each different line as its own object. So when I have the select tool, I just click anywhere on that object or on that line, and then it automatically selects it. And then you can do a lot of the same things you can do with Photoshop once you have something selected. So you immediately are able to transform it. So holding down Shift, you can make things larger, make them smaller. You can rotate things. Obviously, we're not going to be able to see that much of a difference because it's a circle. And then you can move things around by dragging them. And then a little bit more about selection. If you hold down Shift and you have one object selected, if you click the other object, then you are able to select both of them. And then if you want to select a large amount of objects, you can actually just, when you have the selection tool selected, so you have that black arrow, you can just draw a square around them, and then it will select all the tools that you have just put your little selection marquee around. And then you can move those all at the same time. And you can also scale them all at the same time. So another transformation that you can do with only selecting an object is you can change the color. And so this is another thing, a really big difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, is that Illustrator looks at each object, and the color that the object is actually a property of that object. So you're not filling in pixels. You don't need to use the paint bucket tool or the fill tool. You're actually just applying the color as a different property. So when I have something selected, it shows up in a number of different places, the different properties of that object. So when it's one thing, you can come up here and you can see here's the color. So this is in this top bar, the color, the stroke, which is the outline, and we're not worried about that right now. The opacity, and these are actually all things that you can change. And this is a big difference because if you remember from Photoshop, when you're working with things like the blending mode or the opacity, those are things that you can only change the entire layer. However, because of this kind of flipped, these different flipped processes that happen in Illustrator, because each of these objects is its own defined object that isn't dependent on whatever is next to it, even if it's sharing a layer, you can change those types of properties all in the same layer. So I can have 5 different objects with different opacities on one layer, and I can do that. So this is one place to change them in this top bar. You can also come over here and double click on the color box in order to change it. You can use the eyedropper tool. So if you have an object selected and then you go over here and select the eyedropper, or you just hit I, which is the keyboard shortcut, then you can go over and fill it with whatever color pixel that the eyedropper tool is sitting on. when you click it. So it's applying this color to this object's property, color property. So that's what I'm doing there. Another place to access the color is over here in this tab. I tend to work in CMYK just because my brain understands that color a little bit more easily. And it helps, and this is just a preference thing. So it really depends on what you're used to working with. This document is set to be RGB because I'm going to be exporting it for the web. But you can still work with different color spectrums in Illustrator, and it doesn't affect the final output mode. Anyway, so I'm just showing you, so I'm selecting these different circles and these different shapes and just showing that you can apply these different colors in a lot of different ways. So I want to show you all as many ways to do something as possible. But then as we go forward with these exercises, I'm probably going to be doing more what is kind of in my habits. So take a minute here to just play around with, what works best for you. Is it changing the color up here? Is it using the eyedropper tool? Is it double clicking over here? Is it using this tab? It's really kind of up to you. So another thing that is different with Illustrator is that within a single layer, you're able to define the different order that shapes are in. So different objects are all stacked up. So for instance, I'm going to take this yellow circle and let's put it on top of the blue. But because I made this blue circle after I made the yellow circle, it's in a different order. So this blue is on top. So you can also change that. So what I'm going to do here is, let's say I want to have the yellow on top. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Object, and I'm going to go to Arrange, and I'm going to say, I can bring it forward, which brings it one step. So on this layer, every single object is on its own plane, and you can move them up and down one plane at a time. Or if I just know I want it to be on the front, I'm just going to say bring it all the way to the front. And again, a big difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, because these are all their own contained objects, when I have these pixels overlapping this blue, for instance, if this was in the same layer in Photoshop, these yellow pixels would be overlapping the blue, and then when you took the yellow pixels away, you would lose those blue pixels that were completing that circle would be cleared. However, in Illustrator, again, because these are all separate objects, you're not taking away or clearing any of the objects by stacking things on top of each other. So Illustrator remembers what every single shape parameters are and every single shape properties. So I'm also going to go now and just show you how to change the opacity with these. So there's an option up here when you have a single object selected. So I'm going to go 50 there, and so you see how, again, I have one object on this layer that's 50 or 40% opacity, but everything else is 100%. Another way to do it is if you go over here, you can expand out this transparency tab, and it's the same thing. I can change this to 50% and stack that over. And then if I go here, I'm going to go back to my layers tab, and again, I just want to show that all of this is on one layer. And you're able to have these different opacities on a single layer. And then the last thing I'm going to show is just the blending mode. So the way to change that is back in the transparency tab. So I have this selected, and I'm going to go over here where it says normal, and then you get the same blending modes, a lot of the same blending modes that you have in Photoshop. And again, it's interesting because now instead of having to apply a single blending mode to each layer, you're able to apply it to different shapes and lines and any other object that you're creating in Illustrator on the same layer. So those are all some of the basic properties that you're able to apply to different shapes. So very quickly, so I just selected all these, I'm going to delete them. That's just by hitting the delete key, and I'm going to make one more circle. All right. And now I'm going to go over duplicating objects and then aligning them. And so the grid that I was talking about before that Bridget Riley was using to plan out this final painting, we're going to do something similar now using the align process and the different geometric kind of features that Illustrator allows you to do. So first, once you have an object, you can copy and paste it so you don't have to sit here and draw this circle over and over again. There's a couple ways to do this. You can do Command C and then Command V, which are the shortcuts for copy and paste. If you want to, these are up, it's under Edit and then Copy and then Paste. Again, start using these shortcuts because it will really help expedite these exercises and your image creation time. It's just learning these shortcuts. It just saves so much time going back and forth to the toolbar and going back and forth to the menus. So another way to really quickly duplicate things is when you have an object selected, if you hold down the Option key, it will just make a duplicate, and then you can place that duplicate wherever you want. And so then I'm going to select all of these and then place them here. And then I'm going to select that one more time. Uh-oh. And why does that keep happening? All right. Okay. So I'm just going to make this a little bit imperfect. So if you had a series of objects that were scattered all around the page like this, and so maybe you'd copied and pasted them and things were kind of showing up in weird spots. So if you want these all to align, you can select them all. And then once you have more than one object selected, you get a different choice of options up here on this top toolbar. And one of them, because when you're selecting multiple items, it means that Illustrator is saying, oh, you might want to align these or distribute these. And so it's giving you these options up here. So these allow you to align your shapes to each other. Or if you want to, you can also align them to the artboard. But I'm going to keep it so that it says align to selection. So I want all these tops to line up. So I'm going to go here to vertical align top and select it. And then I also want the centers of these objects to be equidistant from one another. So I want them all to be spaced out evenly, and you can also do that in Illustrator. And that's over here in the distribution. So I'm going to have this so that I want it to be horizontally. I want all of their centers to be equally distributed. The width between the centers to be equally distributed. So I'm going to click that. And now I have this so that all the tops of these shapes are exactly the same size. The tops of them are all aligned. And there's the same, they have the same distance between them. Okay. So I'm going to make a group of this now because I have to keep selecting these all to select them, and I can copy and paste them, and then I'm going to have a lot of different circles that I'm going to have to select. So I actually am going to just make a group of these so that it's a little bit easier to move them around and to copy and paste them. So let me select them all. So I'm going to go up to Object and hit Group. It's also Command G. And now if I select one of these, it selects all of them because they're all part of the same group. And another interesting thing that you can do, and something that can really expedite certain things, is you can change the properties of a single group. So if I want all of these to be the same color, I can go over here and change their color. And I can also change the opacity of a whole group. I'm not going to do that here. All right, so now I want to copy and paste this multiple times because I'm wanting to make this field of these circles. Okay, and then looks like I can get one more in there. All right, and now I want all these to be lined up in the same grid vertically. So I'm going to go over here and say vertical distribute center. And then that way I know that they are all spaced out vertically and also horizontally equally. Okay. So I'm going to stop here, and then in the next exercise, I'm going to go over adding effects to shapes, and then also how to ungroup things and then apply more changes to those shapes. So for this exercise, you just want to save this Illustrator file and then follow the posted instructions to export and submit. And this is just going to be a single step in a couple of different exercises. So this is the first step is just showing this grid and then having it all the same size and the same dimension, and then also having it be aligned and distributed evenly.